Hey guys, welcome back to One Stop Biology. So today we are going to start off with the Kingdom Fungi. I hope you remember that yesterday we finished what? Yes, we finished the Kingdom Protista. Okay, and what did we study exactly? So we studied what are the basic characteristic features of Protista, what are the different kinds of Protista, so what are the different groups of Protista, what are their characteristic features, how are they different, and we took some of the examples as well. So till now in the NCERT class 11th we have finished the first chapter, the very first chapter, the basic one, the living world, and then we have started off with the biological classification, and this is the third video of biological classification. And in the same way I'm going to cover the entire syllabus of class 11th and 12th NCERT first, and then we'll cover some more books, we'll solve some examples, some problems as well. So if you are not able to take notes and if you just want to study this, what you can do is you can go to my website www.onestopbiology.com, and you can get access of all these notes in detail. So there you'll get the entire notes of NCERT with solutions and a lot of more material. Please do visit the website. And for people who cannot study the complete video in English, please check the other YouTube channel that I have in the description box below, where I upload the same video in Hindi as well. Okay, so now let's start with the Kingdom Fungi. So what are the basic characteristic features of fungi? So basically they are heterotrophic organisms first of all. Okay, so they are heterotrophs. They basically rely on their nutrition on any other living organism. Now there is a great diversity in morphology and habitat. Okay, and so we can take some example. They there is yeast, there is penicillium, there is Fusinia, right? There are mushrooms. So you would have seen that sometimes if your bread is kept for a long time, there is a bluish greenish mold that develops, and we say that the bread is spoiled and it's rotten. Basically that bluish greenish mold that you see is basically a fungi. But you also eat a fungi in the form of mushrooms, and then you use them in medicines as well in the form of penicillium. So you can see how diverse they are in the morphology and habitat, right? So they are basically cosmopolitan is what we call it, and they can occur in air, water, soil, or on plants and animals. Okay, and they always prefer to grow in warm and humid places. Okay, now there are some exceptions as well, wherein these are unicellulars. Now what are these exceptions? So these exceptions are yeast. So yeast basically is unicellular. Then fungi can also be filamentous, and what happens is their body consists of long slender thread like structure. So you will see like a long slender thread like structure. Okay, so something like this, which is known as hyphae. Okay, and these network of hyphae, so say if you start finding a lot of these structures, okay, something like this is mycelium. Okay, and some hyphae are continuous tubes filled with multinucleated cytoplasms. So in some cases what you'll find is that these are continuous tubes, and these are basically filled with a cytoplasm which has multiple nucleus, and in that case it is known as cenocytic hyphae. Okay, so what they're called as cenocytic hyphae. Okay, now what are their cell walls composed of? So their cell walls are composed of chitin, which is a protein, and polysaccharides. Okay, and they can, what are the modes of nutrition? So they can live on dead substrate, so they are saprophytes. They can live on as parasite in living plants and animals. They can be symbionts in association with algae, which is lichens, and they can also live in the root of higher plants, which is mycorrhiza. Okay, so these are the different modes through which they survive in the earth's environment. Okay, now what is the reproductive characteristic of fungi? So basically they can reproduce through vegetative, asexual and sexual reproduction. Okay, so sexual reproduction is nothing but production of or producing separate male and female gametes and reproducing through that. Okay, so what happens is we'll start with vegetative first. So vegetative reproduction, they basically reproduce through fragmentation. So basically a different fragment of that hyphae, you form another organisms and it cuts off and it develops on its own. Okay, so that is nothing but fragmentation. Then they reproduce by fission. So basically one organism, one fungi divides into two, and they also reproduce through budding. So they produce buds on the body and it basically gets produced as a new fungal organism. Okay, so vegetatively they reproduce as through fragmentation, fission and budding. Then asexual reproduction is something wherein they reproduce through spores. Okay, so there are different spores such as conidia, sporangiospore or zoospore. Okay, and through this they basically asexually reproduce. So these spores basically are in a favorable condition, develops into a hyphae. And in sexual reproduction, how they reproduce is through plasmogamy and karyogamy. Okay, so plasmogamy is something when the two protoplasms fuse. Okay, and these fuse between two motile or non-motile gametes. So fusion of protoplasm between two motile or non-motile gametes is plasmogamy, and karyogamy is direct fusion of two nuclei. Okay, so basically when these structures divide, they divide through meiosis, and this they form a zygote like this, say. Okay, so there are two non-motile gametes which forms a zygote, and then this zygote develops through meiosis, and it produces haploid spores, and these spores then again in adverse conditions survive and in favorable condition develop into a hyphae. Okay, now there's just one more point, that when these fungus reproduces sexually, basically they produce two haploid hyphae. Okay, now what we are going to take up next is what are the different kinds of diploid cells that they form. So in some fungi, these fusion of two haploid cells immediately results in diploid cells. Okay, but in many others, there is an intervening stage which occurs in between the haploid and diploid cells, which is known as dikaryophase, and where there are basically diploid cells at 2n, and you form another stage in between where it is n plus n. Okay, and then the parental nuclei fuse and cells become diploid. Okay, so based on morphology of mycelium, the mode of spore formation and fruiting bodies, and then the division of kingdom in various classes. So basically they divided the different types of fungus based on the morphology of mycelium, which is nothing but a colony of hyphae, spore formation and fruiting body, and various other classes. And the first group is Phycomycetes. Now what are Phycomycetes? So Phycomycetes are found in aquatic habitats. Okay, so these are found in aquatic habitats, and they are obligate parasite on plants Okay, they also live in moist and damp places such as decaying wood. So they are aquatic. They can be an obligate parasite on plants, and they also survive on decaying wood because it is moist and damp. Now in the case of Phycomycetes, the mycelium that they have is aseptate and cynocytic. They reproduce through asexual reproduction by zygospores, which is motile, so it has a flagella, and by aplanospores, which is non-motile. And they also reproduce sexually through fusion of two gametes. Now these gametes can be similar in morphology or dissimilar in morphology. So the two gametes can be isogamous or anisogamous. Okay, now some of the examples of Phycomycetes is bread mold. So I told you initially when we started off this video is that sometimes you find a mold on a rotten bread which is bluish greenish color. That is nothing but the fungi rhizopus. Okay, then you have mucor, then you have albugo, which is again a parasitic fungi on mustard. Okay, so the next form of fungi is Ascomycetes. Now what is Ascomycetes? So basically they are known as sac fungi. Okay, and they are multicellular and sometimes very rarely unicellular. Now how do they survive? They are either saprophytic decomposers or parasites. They also sometimes grow on dung, so they are known as caprophilous. Okay, now in this case the mycelium is branched and septate. The asexual spores that they produce is conidia. Okay, and the mycelium is known as conidiophores. Now the conidia on germination basically produces mycelium, and the sexual spores that through which they reproduces are ascospores. Okay, and it is produced in asci. Now asci are arranged in different types of fruiting bodies which are known as ascocarps. Okay, so what are the fruiting bodies of asci? It is ascocarps. What are the examples of Ascomycetes? So these are some of the examples of Ascomycetes. So you have Neurospora, you have Aspergillus, okay, which are examples of Ascomycetes. So the third type of fungi is Basidiomycetes. Now what are Basidiomycetes? They are known as mushrooms. Okay, so they are commonly known as mushrooms. These are bracket-like fungi or puffballs, and there are some edible forms of mushrooms as well. Now what happens is again they grow in damp soil or on damp tree or logs. Okay, and sometimes they are parasites as well. So parasitic form of Basidiomycetes are rusts and smuts. Now mycelium in these cases are again branched and septate, and the vegetative reproduction, so they basically reproduce vegetatively by fragmentation, and asexual spores are not found in them generally. Okay, and again sexual reproduction is completely absent. Okay, so plasmogamy again by fusion of two vegetative or somatic cells happens, and resultant structure is known as dikaryotic. Okay, and which gives rise to basidium. Okay, now karyogamy and meiosis here takes place by producing 4 basidiospores. Okay, so here the karyogamy and meiosis takes place by 4 basidiospores. Okay, and these basidiospores produce basidium, and these basidia again are arranged in fruiting bodies which are known as basidiocarps. So in the way you had asci in Ascomycetes, you have basidia here and basidiocarp as a fruiting body. Now example are various forms of mushrooms like agaricus, and then you have fungus as rust and smut as well. Okay, now the last type of fungi that you have is Deuteromycetes. Okay, what is Deuteromycetes? They are basically known as imperfect fungi. And why are they known as imperfect fungi? It is because they only produce through asexual vegetative phase. Okay, and only asexual vegetative phase of these fungi are known. They are present only as a form of that. Okay, now they reproduce only by asexual spores, which are known as conidia. Okay, again mycelium is septate and branched, and they are sometimes saprophytes and parasites. Mostly they are decomposers of litter and help in mineral cycling. Okay, so trichoderma is an example that you can remember, or alternaria as well as an example of Deuteromycetes. Now what are they known as? They are known as imperfect fungi because they only are present as asexual vegetative phase. Okay, so the last of NCERT chapter 2 very shortly deals with two other kingdoms, which are kingdom Plantae and Animalia. Now, so they basically mention here in kingdom Plantae that it includes all eukaryotic chlorophyll containing organisms, which are some are partially heterotrophic, which are insectivorous, but mostly they are autotrophs, right? And there are some insectivorous plants like Phoenix flytrap and some parasites present as well, but mostly they are autotrophs. Now what their cells are, they have a cell wall which is made of cellulose. Okay, they have prominent chloroplast and a eukaryotic structure. They include algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms. And life cycle basically have two distinct phases, a diploid and an haploid phase. Now the haploid gametophytic phase is there, and diploid saprophytic phase is there, which alternate with each other, and this alternation is known as alternation of generation. Okay, and then they also introduce the kingdom Animalia, which is nothing but a group of heterotrophic eukaryotic organisms. They are multicellular. Their cells lack cell wall, so always remember that they lack cell wall. They directly or indirectly depends on plant or even animals for food, and here they have a proper digestive, they have an organ system wherein there is a digestion wherein you store glycogen or fat. The mode of nutrition is holozoic, that is they ingest food, and the growth pattern is definitive. So they have a definitive shape and size. Okay, they are capable of locomotion, which lacks in kingdom Plantae in plants. Then the higher forms of animals have very elaborate sensory and neuromotor mechanism. There also an exemplary feature, which is sexual reproduction, which happens through copulation. Okay, then they also introduce viruses, viroids and lichens. So what are viruses? They basically did not find a place in classification because they are non-cellular organisms, right? Now how they are different? Basically they have inert crystalline structure outside the living cell. Okay, so they are non-living organisms, so that is why they didn't find any place in the classification. Now once they infect a cell, they take over the machinery of host cell to replicate themselves, killing the host. Okay, so in 1892 the scientist Pasteur named it virus, meaning venom or poisonous fluid. In the year 1898, Bezernik demonstrated the extract of plants of tobacco which was infected by a virus. Okay, and then in the year 1935, W.M. Stanley showed how virus could be crystallized, and these crystals consist nothing but proteins. Okay, and they that means that they have genetic material as well, which could either be DNA or RNA. Now there are plants virus as well as animal viruses. Plants viruses are usually single stranded RNA, and animal viruses usually have single or double stranded RNA or double stranded DNA as well. Okay, now there are various viruses which can cause disease like mumps, smallpox, herpes, and AIDS. Then you have viroids. So here basically there are certain examples of viruses. Okay, and as you can see here, so basically what do they have? The first one is a tobacco mosaic virus, which is a plant virus, and it has an RNA and a capsid, which is again a protein. So it's entirely a protein structure. In the case of bacteriophage, they have a head, they have a collar, they have a sheath and tail fibers. Okay, so these are some examples of different types of viruses. Okay, we'll move on to viroids now. Let me just clear my screen. Yes, so what are viroids? So these are basically a new infectious agents which are smaller than viruses, and they form different types of diseases. So basically T.O. Diner in 1971 discovered viroids. Okay, and what happened is he found it in potato as a potato spindle tuber disease. Okay, so they were again found to be a free RNA. It doesn't has a protein coat, and that is the reason they are named as viroids. Now RNA of viroid, it has a very low molecular weight. Okay, so these are viroids. Now the last one is lichens. Lichens are nothing but symbiotic association. Now it can be between algae and fungi. Okay, so what is symbiotic association? It is nothing but mutually beneficial. So in this case, algae and fungi both are benefiting each other in some or the other way. Okay, now the algal component is known as phycobiont and the fungal component is known as mycobiont. Okay, it can be autotrophic and it can be heterotrophic. So always remember that they can be an autotroph or an heterotroph. Okay, so basically the algal component is autotroph and the fungal component is heterotroph. Okay, so that means algae, the algal component prepares food and the fungal component provides shelter, and they absorb the mineral nutrients and water for its partner. So in that way they both are benefiting each other. Okay, and lichens are basically very good pollution indicator. So basically what happens is they do not grow in polluted areas. Okay, so these basically cover the entire 5 kingdom classification, although the kingdom animal and plants in short, which we are going to take up later in further coming chapters. So this basically ends our chapter 2, which is biological classification, and tomorrow I'll be starting with the next chapter, which is plant kingdom. Okay, I hope you understood this chapter completely. If not, please drop in your feedback in comments. I would like to answer all these questions. Also, you can contact me for further clarification on the WhatsApp number given in the description of this link. Please like this video, share it with your friends, and do subscribe to the channel in order to get all the daily updates about the videos. Thank you. Bye-bye.